Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Love and Philosophy. This is Andrea Hyatt. I'm in New York, and if you happen to be around, come to Brooklyn next week. Look in the show notes for details. I would love to see you. We're going to be talking about attention and landscapes of mind. Today's conversation is with Charlie Munford of the Agential Biology Institute, and it's a very interesting, different sort of conversation, as Charlie is a very interesting and different sort of person with a very meandering is the word that comes life, although he's done so many different things. Even when you listen to this conversation, you'll see that we start with smushed bananas under couch cushions, and we end up talking about some of the hardest issues in biology and the meaning of life, but all in sort of the same tone that's kind of easy to understand. I think I just want to let you listen to this conversation rather than try and describe it a lot, but I do think it's a different way of thinking about what education is, how we get education, what we can do in life, regardless of what sort of education we've had, the wandering and the wondering of life, not to mention a different understanding of biological terms, evolution, natural selection, this wonderful part about a lost lecture from Karl Popper, which is just really interesting to me, and I can't wait to explore more. But, we also talk about paddling in canoes in the wilderness where he didn't see people for days or weeks, actually, and then going to do a literature degree at Yale, feeling a bit out of place there, and sitting around reading Shakespeare folios, playing on the polo team, mucking out the barn. There's all kinds of things like this, and we go from Mississippi to Cuba to New Orleans into, I guess, labs all over the world, because a lot of, I would say probably, some of the most famous scientists right now are somehow talking with Charlie, working with Charlie, thinking about these issues of agency together. That's how I met him. I was invited into this, I guess it's a kind of a group where people present, and some of the people who are part of that are, for example, the wonderful Richard Watson and Mike Levin, Stuart Kaufman, Yogi Yeager, Alicia Guerrero, Kate Nave, I think, gave a talk. There's all sorts of wonderful people who've talked there. I'm not even naming half of them, so have a look. But the point is, they're all thinking about agency and biology differently and trying to reimagine some of these big topics from a perspective that Charlie will present here. So keep listening if you want to know. There's one little part where he wanted to explain more and offer a few examples. So I snipped that back into the conversation, but otherwise it just flows right along, just as we had it. And settle in, get ready for a wander and a wonder through an interesting life and some interesting ideas. And I hope you're doing well out there, wherever you are. I also hope that you are finding some meanderings that are as surprising in a good way as this conversation was for me, and also as being part of this group has been for me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Thanks for doing whatever you do in the world, because I'm sure you've done something good today, even if it's just a kindness to someone at the grocery store, or to your dog, or to yourself, reading something that someone wrote, really reading it rather than putting it into AI, reading a poem, listening to this. That is a very beautiful thing that you're doing. So thank you. It all matters. All right, be well. Till next time. Hi, Charlie. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks for being on Love and Philosophy today.
Hi, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
So tell people who are you? What are you doing? What do we need to know about Charlie Munford?
Yeah, well, I wanted to start by telling you a story because it's just a great story that really paints a picture of who I am right now and what my life is like. So last night I was down in the basement watching TV with my two kids, and the girl, she's 8, and she went upstairs to get a banana, to get a snack, and she brought it down, and I was real proud. She shared it with her little brother, and she peeled a banana and she gave him half, and so he's going to be 3 on Monday.
Oh. Hmm.
Yeah. So so anyway, a while later he comes up to me and he goes, "Where's my banana?" And I was like, "I don't know, buddy." And then I saw him, he went over to the sofa and he lifted up the sofa cushions and he goes, "There it is."
Oh,
I was like, awesome. Yeah.
and it was there, I guess.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
there.
So that's your life right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So, is there any creativity in that? Any intentional creativity? Because that's a term you've been using in our discussions, or that I've, you know, something about creativity. What do you see in your kids
Yeah.
relative to that, or
Yeah, I
your
mean
own life?
it's nonstop with kids. They're the most creative creatures on earth. And yeah, it's just, yeah, being a dad is every minute is exciting. That really is, yeah, that's the most exciting thing in my life, I would say. But
Could you ever have imagined that it would be like that before it happened?
no, and I had a buddy, and this is a buddy that I like ride horses with and shoot guns, and he's pretty like rugged kind of dude, and he was like when I was about to have my daughter was my first kid, and he's like I was like, "What is it like, man?"
Hmm.
He had a daughter a couple of years before that, and he was like, "Man," he's like, "You can prepare." Your life is going to change, right? You've been thinking about that. You've made some plans, you've seen it happen to other people, but you know, you can prepare for that. What you can't prepare for is how you're going to change. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, dude, he's like, he's like, 2 years ago, he's like, I could have never predicted that on a Saturday morning, it's a nice day, fish are biting. He's like, I could have never predicted the one thing I want to be doing is sitting on the living room floor playing dolls with the little girl. I was like, yeah.
That's very sweet. What's your life like other than kids right now? What's happening?
Yeah, so well, I'm in the middle of, I was thinking about this conversation because I was excited to talk to you and um I know, we share a lot of interests and I feel like I'm in the middle of the most incredible adventure um in my career and I was thinking back about it and I've had a pretty like adventure filled life, I mean, I've really done a lot of unusual things and had a lot of experiences that most people haven't had. And
Okay, you have to name one or two right quick because
yeah, okay. Um, well, I'll tell you 3 stories. Um, yeah, yeah, they're 3 good stories. The first one is, I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and I spent a lot of time outdoors hunting and fishing and trapping with my granddad, my dad, my friends, but my parents were both lawyers and they were well to do, but they really believed in public education. And so they sent us to public school in Jackson, and some of the schools were like pretty rough, rough around the edges. And and there was a boy in my middle school. I used to think, because people get in fights all the time, it's real rough. And this is like thinking about parenting, you're like, wonder how much to protect your kids, And, but I remember, when I was in, I guess it was 6th or 7th grade, there was this boy named Two Pants. And, that was, that was back when, do you remember sagging? Like, it's like
oh, the
still
wearing your pants really low.
wearing your pants
Yeah.
real low. Like people still do it a little bit, but back then, it was a really big deal. And anyway, so two pants, Kelly, he sagged so much that they made him wear two pants to school. So they called him two pants. Kelly, and he was always being bad. And I wondered, how bad you had to be to get kicked out of our school, to get sent to like juvenile detention, because all this bad stuff would happen. And so two pants, like he punched a teacher in the face one time, and he would like pull weave out of girls' hair and run around the gym with it. And he got in a fight with this other boy and threw him off the bleachers, and he was still there. He never got sent to juvie. And then one day he brought a loaded gun to school and he was mad at some boy, and he went from classroom to classroom looking for him. And they got on the intercom and did like a lockdown. And you know this is before all the like school shootings and stuff. And our history teacher, Mr. Martin, chased him out of the school barehanded, and chased him across the street and caught him and took his gun away.
Oh
And
my
then,
gosh.
yeah, and then they sent him to juvie.
Okay, so that's what you have to do. Don't do that though, anyone.
Yeah. So anyway, I was I had a great family, and my parents, took care of me and gave me a lot of opportunities. And I went when I was in high school, I went to this camp called Keewaydin and paddled canoes, and I paddled all the way to the Hudson Bay with a group. And we didn't see a single for 6 weeks. We didn't see a single person on that trip. It was that
Wow.
far up in the wilderness. And afterwards I went to this college that was also in the wilderness. And then after that I went to Yale. And at Yale, I was invited to join the Elizabethan Club. And that's a club where basically people, they serve tea on really nice like china sets, and then they sit around, and people wait on them, and then they sit around and they look at the original Shakespeare folios. That's what they do. And that's the club. And then
Wow.
and then I joined the Yale polo team, the horse polo team, and played horse
Why did you
polo.
go to Yale? What was it
um,
like? What was your subject or what were you wanting
I
there?
was I was I was interested in literature. I was reading poetry.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I had been out.
So that's why
I,
you're reading Shakespeare folios.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But
I had
sorry, I
been out.
interrupted you.
I don't
Something
know.
about
Well,
polo.
it was just like very incongruous, because I just come from, I'd worked on a ranch out in Nevada. I'd worked as a driller in the bottom of this gold mine. I'd packed mules in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and done all this stuff that was really like, pretty gritty. And then here I was at the Elizabethan Club, and on the Yale polo team, and we traveled to Oxford and Cambridge to play polo.
Wow. What was that? Was that hard to be in such a different world suddenly, or what did it just happen naturally for you?
It was very hard. It was very hard. It was like cognitive dissonance, but it was fun too. It was really fun.
Are you ready to elevate your leadership journey through exploring the wisdom of the ages? Subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube Music. You can also find us everywhere else podcasts are available. If you find value in our episodes, please leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. We need those reviews to grow, and it is truly the easiest way to help other leaders and lovers of literature discover this show. And thank you for your support.
How did you deal with it? Did you talk to people about it or you just did
Well,
it like we do when we're
well,
young?
yeah, we just do it, right? But I mean, I was kind of, I paid my dues to the Yale polo team by mucking out the barn. And so I was kind of, I was a little different, you know. I felt a little different,
Yeah.
but it was fun.
Hmm.
And you know, that's how you that's how you kind of, you know, you take on new things as adventures and you see where they go, you know.
Yeah. I like that you were in a lot of different worlds. It's a good assortment of stories to see how you were in a lot of different environments that didn't really fit each other. I mean, that's how I
Right.
think of it. I moved a lot as a kid, so I'm comparing it to that where it's just completely different kind of regularities around you and you figure out how to deal with a lot of different ones.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But I stopped you. You were going to say what was you said this time of your life is so exciting and powerful. So what's that about?
Oh yeah. Well, right. Yeah. So um I found myself, you know, many years later, I had a business that was I had a wild boar smoked sausage company down in New Orleans. Yeah,
Wow.
it was totally awesome.
How did you end up in New Orleans? Sorry, we're just jumping all over, but that's
Oh,
good. I mean, you were at Yale and then you end up in New Orleans doing sausage
yeah, yeah.
within, how many years or so? Like
Well,
immediately?
I moved back to Mississippi and I started farming. So when I was, I guess, an undergrad, I went down to Cuba and I studied organic agriculture in Cuba, like behind the communist, you know, curtain, because Cuba had this amazing system. It probably doesn't exist anymore, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost their food subsidies, and so they allowed private enterprise, but only in like local farming. So they had this incredible local food system that was really vibrant and like entrepreneurial and
Oh, wow. Amazing. You got
yeah.
to see that.
Oh, it was totally cool. And yeah, it was so I was totally obsessed with that. And so I moved back to Mississippi to start a farm and raise food. And then one thing led to another and it became this local local meat company. New Orleans had, you know, still has some of the best restaurants in the world. I mean, hundreds of world-class restaurants. And so my business was selling meat to those restaurants, and that's how we started the Wild Boar Sausage Company. So it was kind of all connected, but
Did you publish any books or poetry or anything? Because you're a good writer. I've noticed
thank
your
you.
Yale training paid off.
Yeah.
But I've never even asked you, do you have published books somewhere?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
don't. I've written a lot, but I haven't collected into anything. And part of it is my interests are so my interests are so specific. Like I've become so enmeshed in this particular problem at the foundation of biology that, you know, I've really been impatient to work on the problem with other people instead of writing about it in the context where no one kind of sees what sort of problem it is and what sort of solutions there might be. And so now that I'm involved in, you know, I'm the president of this Agential Biology Institute, and we're actually raising money to do the empirical experiments that will sort of demonstrate, you know, what we're talking about and what this problem really is. Um, so now that's becoming like the main center focus of my life. I kind of feel like I've been looking for, you know, 25 years for some way to make that real. And now it's here, you know.
What about the agency and the biology? Like, how does that fit into everything said so far? Were you already thinking about these ideas or, I mean, did you study biology? Like
Yeah,
how
I
did you
mean,
get in so deep into, because you're really deep into the biology now.
really deep into it. Yeah. Well, when the sausage company, the Wild Boar Sausage Company failed tragically, and
I have to laugh because you're laughing. It's just funny. It's a funny story. It's a funny statement. The Wild Boar Sausage Company failed tragically, but yes.
yeah, it did. Yeah, it failed tragically. But anyway, that year was really bad for me, and I've always been, you know, very interested in nature and sort of our place in nature, and that's how I got into local food in the first place. But that year was terrible. You know, the business failed and I was going through a divorce and I just had my first kid I got this presumptive diagnosis of cancer and my dog died. Like
Oh
all these
no.
things happened at once. And yeah,
Whoa.
I got, falsely accused of things and sued. It was awful. It was the worst like constellation of things to, that that's ever happened to me. But I was really like pushed out of my worldview. I was really pushed into this like kind of what are we? Like what are we doing here? And why, I'd been thinking about chronic disease a lot because I'd struggled with high blood pressure and some like, high cholesterol and high blood pressure and weight. And I was just very dissatisfied with the sort of the explanations that you could find, and so I got drawn into this question of biological agency, and it just got deeper and deeper and more interesting. And there's this whole hidden story. There's this kind of secret history of biology that I'd love to share.
So how did you start reading books about Darwin, or I mean, where did you start with all this?
I started with chronic disease research, like
Okay.
like what is at the root of these. I mean, the questions were already all around me, right? Because the local food movement is all about like the whole premise is there's this, the needs of modern society and of humans are kind of out of sync with the environment in various ways. And actually, we're out of sync with our own physiology
Mm-hmm.
in certain ways. And there are these like received ideas about that I didn't ultimately find very satisfying. And so I was kind of primed to like look for better alternatives and deeper ideas that might sort of explain the whole thing
Is
in a
that
more
when you started looking
scientific way.
to genetics or Darwin, or what did you start?
Well, the I mean, really, the premise of Agential Biology Institute is that there's a hidden causal layer in biology. There's a missing causal layer that gives an intentional direction to cells as they develop. And so, what the project I'm in now is all about is building an infrastructure to study that missing causal layer. And um, it's necessary because the fundamental theory we have, which is, as you mentioned, that it's the gene-based theory, um, it makes predictions, and the predictions have been refuted. Like the predictions are that variation is blind. And we're finding instead that there are all these examples of organisms changing themselves and their DNA in heritable ways, in a directional way. And that's not allowed by the theory. And so we need another deeper theory that somehow incorporates that knowledge. And if we do that, like if we uncover it, it implies that there's a universal mechanism for learning in cells, in all cells. And so if we uncover that sort of mechanism or mechanisms, then it reframes everything that has to do with cellular coordination. Okay. And so if you think about what, right, exactly. If you think about what has to do, what problems emanate from cellular coordination? I mean, they're the hardest problems we have as a society, right? They're cancer, autoimmunity, neurodegeneration, aging itself. And beyond that, like we are groups of cells. And so as organisms, the same principles apply when we coordinate with one another and with the world. And so now you're talking about problems like addiction, mental illness, crime, war and peace. Now you're into like this much deeper and more expansive set of consequences. But they all emanate from this, from this story that biology has, that it begins with no agency, right? So a human begins as a single cell, and that's, a single celled zygote, and a single cell is something that just follows genetic instructions. So
You're
it
saying
does.
this is the normal story that we all accept?
this is the dominant view
Just, yeah.
across the life sciences is that, at the beginning of development, it's just a gene-driven robot, basically. And then at some point, the human gets larger and larger, and at some point, unspecified moment, there's a mind. And then from then on, the human follows instructions from their mind, right? And they're independent of just their DNA and the environment. And so they have this directional, intentional direction, right, that they follow through learning. And that leads biology as a whole discipline to be asking questions like what gene leads to what protein, and what protein leads to what mechanism, and what neurotransmitter leads to what behavior, what enzyme leads to inflammation, questions like that, piece by piece. But because this evidence of Lamarckism, we really need a more synthetic set of questions. So we need to ask ourselves, what are the common features of all cells and all organisms that could lead to a universal learning mechanism?
Well, you mentioned Lamarckism. I think you're talking a bit about epigenetics here, but just for those who don't know, so that's kind of the typical story that you just laid out. And you said you were starting to question that, and you said there's a lot of evidence now, but I think some people don't really know about the different things that have been going on in terms of the way we once thought of genes and the way we're thinking about them now in science. How would you describe that sort of shift that's been happening there?
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, the short, well, there's a short part and a long part. The short part is that um, people have been finding these results of inheritance of acquired characteristics. That's called Lamarckism. And they've been putting them aside because they've been asking, there are two criticisms of the idea that we need to study biological agency. So the criticisms go like this. They say, well, if those changes are in the direction of reproductive fitness, then they must have gotten there from prior natural selection. Okay. So that's not logically necessary. Like there are still other ways that they could get there, but it requires a lot of imagination to imagine some sort of outside the box theory that involves like time reversal or multiple universes or something really weird,
Right.
right? So
So
that
the
the
idea is that it's
organism could
all
sort of,
already in the body and in the cell, and that's just going to play it. It's going to kind of play out the script or something.
it's just cryptic. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah,
concealed until there's a challenge, right?
right. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of sympathetic to that criticism. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
that's fairly good, but that's because I don't think that this, directional change is in the direction of reproductive fitness necessarily. Like I think that's an
You,
unintended consequence at time. Like that's a correlation, not a
you don't
causal.
think life is just all about that?
No, I
Yeah.
don't think it can be because
Right.
I yeah, that is a hypothesis though. Like we'll get into that maybe in a few minutes. So
Yeah.
that's a
Let's
test.
keep laying out
That's a
the
testable
Darwin and the
question.
Lamarckian difference there.
Yeah, totally. Well, so the second criticism is they say, well, okay, suppose this variation it's either not blind to reproductive fitness, it's in the direction of reproductive fitness, in which case it's got to be put there by natural selection ahead of time. Or if it is blind to reproductive fitness, then it doesn't have any evolutionary salience, right? It doesn't matter. But that's totally wrong because the whole set of variation, organisms could be trying to do something else. And then from that set of variations that they created because they're trying to do something else, natural selection chooses the ones that have reproductive fitness, right? So the whole teleology, the whole purpose of life could be something other than reproductive fitness. And it still requires reproductive fitness to get into the future as a lineage, right? So, but those are two separate
At
questions.
least for some amount of time and
Yeah,
some from
exactly.
some. Yeah.
Exactly. So the question of what are we trying to do as individuals? And that's the question of our creativity, of our intentional directionality as organisms. That's separate from whether we get into the future or not, right? So natural selection is a perfectly good mechanism. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. And in
What is
fact,
that for people who don't know? Because sometimes people think they know what that is, but maybe they're thinking of something different. So just,
totally,
yeah.
totally. Yeah, yeah. That they almost always are. So let me, yeah, let me
Let's
explain.
just clarify that
Let's
before we
just
move
clarify that. Yeah,
on.
they almost always are because because they've been misled. So this whole like history, it has um it has like four heroes and two villains.
Okay. This is
And
the
the
novel
villains
that you will
aren't,
write of it.
yeah, the villains aren't really villains, but they're just people who I think made mistakes, and the mistakes turned out to be way too popular. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, so we've mentioned a couple of times this guy Lamarck. So there's Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So he was a biologist around the turn of the 19th century, like 1800, 1810. And his work was really good for that time because at the time like science didn't even have a theory of organic change over time. Like people didn't even have a concept of evolution. They thought that every species has been there for as long as life has been there, because they were operating from the starting assumption that God created them all in 7 days, right? At least Western Europeans were. And so um, Lamarck's theory was, it's not like that. It's changed through geological time. And that was a radical new innovation. And that's what he was known for in his time. And what he's known for now is something that he would be shocked to find his name attached to because everyone believed it at his time. And it wasn't something that he invented. And that was the idea that use and disuse can shape variation. So that's a really like common sense idea, right? That, you know, things that appear to be um, good solutions to a problem in nature, it seems like the organisms got there because they tried to solve that problem, right? So his example was long legs on wading birds. Like it seems like, during the course of, trying to not get your feathers wet and still hunt in shallow water, the birds somehow achieved through their intentional creativity longer and longer legs until they arrived at that form. And so basically the idea of use and disuse that has some influence over variation. That was an idea that virtually all biologists believed until maybe the 1890s. And so throughout Lamarck's life and Darwin. So Darwin also believed that. Darwin believed that one of the sources of variation was use and disuse. And it wasn't like a fringe view that Darwin had, it was like core to his theory. Okay. And in the
This
origin
is
of,
definitely not the story most people tell or say or
no,
think
this
or
is
assume.
no, this is not at all the story that people hear that you learn in school. So but Darwin in the origin of species, he mentions use and disuse as a source of variation. He mentions it 8 times, according
Oh,
to
wow.
Noble. Yeah. And then he went on to invent a theory of how those influences from all over the body could wind up in the eggs and sperm. It was called gymules. So he thought of these small particles that circulate through the bloodstream that carry the influence of the use and disuse that you choose to do.
Gym mules. Like
Yeah,
gym, like GEMMULES.
yeah, GEMMULES, exactly.
And
Yeah,
Darwin came up with this.
this is Darwin. This
Yeah.
is Darwin.
Just for
Yes.
people who think you're talking about Lamarck. Yeah.
Lamarck and Darwin shared this view that use and disuse had some influence over variation.
Mm,
Neither one of them believed that everything that you acquire in your lifetime is inherited, right? So they're
right. But what
obvious.
were the gym mules doing? Were they doing that? Because I
Yeah,
cut you
they were.
off to spell it, but you were saying
Yeah, they were carrying some influence from your
in the
body,
blood.
in the blood, from your
Okay.
physiology down to your germline cells, like down to your eggs and sperm, where it could be transmitted. That influence could be transmitted to your children.
And
Okay.
Darwin thought this, wrote
Darwin
this.
thought this. He
Is
wrote
this
this.
in the Origin
This
of
was his.
Species?
No, this was in a later book, but this
Okay.
is but this was his theory to explain, variation. So Darwin Darwin and Wallace co-invented the idea of natural selection, right? So natural
Hmm.
selection is there's variation in species, in populations, there's variation, and then nature decides, which ones perish without reproducing and which ones reproduce and which ones reproduce the most. And so that affects the future change because of heritability, that affects the future makeup of the population. So it explains evolution. So Lamarck already had this theory of evolution, right? And so Darwin and Wallace added some rigor to it by pointing out that nature, can select between different variants. But he believed that those variants were not blind with respect to use and disuse. So the things that the organism did during its lifetime, he believed were sources of variation. And now that's called Lamarckism, but it didn't come from Lamarck, and it was believed by Darwin. So
Yeah, that's very confusing because you
that's
definitely
yeah,
learn that Darwin was just about selecting for traits based on, what would reproduce, lead to more reproduction. And Lamarck was saying things could happen epigenetically, and that
yeah,
means use and disuse in this way, that like what you're doing in your engagement with the environment can somehow also change your body in a way that could be passed on. But we
exactly.
now have evidence for that, right? I mean, like actual
Right,
studies, at least in the
right.
short term and long term in animals, right? That actual use in the way we, like, let's put it very generally, the way we live and the certain conditions do actually influence kind of what we give to our children in a way, or what passes down or something like that. Or how would you put it in a better way?
So the current theory says that changes to the inherited program must be caused by blind chance and filtered by natural selection. Otherwise, the change to the program is caused by the program itself. So that's a circular argument, and that can't be valid. It makes common sense that a program can't say scramble me. Otherwise, you can only run it once or twice before it self-destructs. So that's why we need to add an agential mechanism to explain the program adding in information during the organism's lifetime. So I have 6 examples that prove to you that that does in fact happen. The most typical organisms on Earth are prokaryotes. So they're the majority of the cells in our body. They're also the majority of organisms that live in every natural environment. Single cells can't help but inherit all the acquired changes because the whole organism becomes the offspring when it goes through mitosis. So when they get challenged by an antibiotic, what happens? They acquire resistance. Okay, how? It turns out that they trade genes with one another. That's called horizontal gene transfer. How important is it? The best recent estimates are that 81% of the cumulative genetic change in prokaryotic genomes is due to horizontal gene transfer. So, does that sound accidental? I don't think so. If the program responsible for life was Darwinian rather than agential, every aspect of the organism's lifestyle would be organized to prevent that kind of change. Instead, it's the main cause of genetic evolution. So the program is actually set up to change the program in response to stress, and that requires an agential mechanism. The body plan information of an organism is supposed to be written into the genes, right, where it can't be altered. The information of what sort of shape to take on. So one of our strategic partners at ABI, Mike Levin, he studies planaria, which reproduce by fission. So that means they reproduce after being cut in two. They regenerate. Both sides of both the cut pieces regenerate. So he's shown if you block the transmission of electricity between cells at a critical time, you can often make them regenerate into two-headed worms. And then indefinitely, every time they're cut, they regenerate again into two-headed form. And that's without any genetic change. So that shows that the pattern memory for how many heads to have is written not into the genome, but into the attractor states in the electrical dynamics of the planarian's body. Okay. So let's look at another type of worm. So another one of our ABI strategic partners, Oded Rachavi, in his lab at Tel Aviv, showed that C. elegans worms produce small RNAs in response to viruses and in response to starvation. And in both cases, they're inherited for several generations. He found that the longer the heritable response had persisted, the more likely it was to continue into the next generation. It's a kind of epigenetic momentum. So the longer the stress condition is applied, the more heritable the response becomes, and the more persistent the response becomes. It's acquired and inherited, and then it becomes more and more persistent if the stimulus stays there for longer. And then he also demonstrated that the cytoplasm alone is sufficient to carry the inherited signal. Okay, so that research shows that just like the prokaryotes I mentioned before, the worms are set up to change their own program to adapt to diet and stress. Okay, now let's move to mammals. Okay, so we've gone, prokaryotes, planaria, worms. Now let's look at mammals. Okay, the Rando lab at UMass showed that in male mice that ate low protein diets, small RNAs were delivered to sperm, and that gave the offspring a different cholesterol synthesis in their livers. Okay. And then other labs have also shown that human sperm contains abundant small RNAs that are produced in the epididymis, so produced by the body, and they correlate with the father's diet, and it correlates with the father's metabolic state, and it also correlates with IVF embryo quality. Okay. So once again, the program is set up, and this is mammals, this is humans. So the program is set up to change the program in response to diet and stress. And that requires an agential mechanism to explain that. And I need to mention one more effect that's even more amazing and cool. So studies in mice show that licking and grooming behavior of mother mice stably programs adult stress reactivity in their offspring by methylating a particular location on the genome in hippocampal neurons. Okay. So that's reprogramming that causes the young to grow into mothers who lick and groom to the same extent. Okay, so the reprograms the offspring. And in this case, the behavior is transmitted from mother to daughter entirely outside the normal reproductive pathway of sperm and egg, because it's the licking reprogramming the genome in the hippocampal neurons, directly changing the behavior. So that's the program rewriting the program without even touching the genes in the zygote, without even touching the sperm and the egg. So,
And how long did that last? Do we know if that lasted for the next generation?
well, quite often it doesn't last very long, but that's in principle doesn't matter for two reasons. First of all, because if the stimulus doesn't last for multiple generations, then it means that removing
Just
it
changed
is
again.
also adaptive, right? Removing it when it's no longer there, that's adaptive as well. So you can't say it has to be permanent, because that, in principle, if the organism is changing in response to its environment, it's not just taking permanent changes and keeping them forever, it's removing them if they're not useful, right? So for that reason, for the second reason is that um, even there's something called genetic assimilation, which means that if an organism can adopt a new trait or a new lifestyle or a new habit or whatever, and then, do that epigenetically or physiologically, um, remaining in that habit or trait, using adopting that lifestyle, let's call it that, for a period of time, then the selective pressures on their genes are to recapitulate that same behavior or lifestyle, right? And so Conrad Waddington discovered that in the 1950s with fruit flies, that he could induce a change in the flies, and then if he selected for it, he could cause it to happen without inducing it. He could cause it to become genetically encoded just through selection. So that shows you how a trait can move from, this is something I discovered through my creativity intentionally. It can move from there into, this is something that's genetically encoded that
Yeah.
I have a propensity to do this because of my genes, but it can move from one to the other. And so that shows how learning could give directionality to evolution, even if it's has a genetic underpinning. So
That's a good way to say it. Learning can give directionality. Because I'm wondering why this is so controversial, or how to bring that out, that why, because this has been so controversial to think that, I mean, epigenetics is a terrible word to some people. But I also was thinking, isn't there a study, a Dutch study from after World War II, where because of the war there was some starvation, and this caused some changes that we saw in the next generation weren't actually about a lack of food or something like that? Am I remembering that correctly?
yeah,
Okay.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a natural experiment where like the experience of starvation changed the phenotype of the grandchildren, of the people who experienced it.
So we've seen this in animals a lot, but also there's human studies. But why is it
There's human
so,
studies, and
why do people freak out about this idea?
because it, because it removes the whole grounding teleology of life. Like people are incredibly people are incredibly
Is that
attached to
all? Oh, only that.
That's
Okay.
all. Right. People are incredibly attached to the idea that life is about survival and reproduction, that it's about competition, red in tooth and claw, And this challenges that whole teleology, like the whole thing of what are we doing here, right? That whole thing is challenged. And like what ABI has done is figured out ways that can be empirically testable. Those can be testable questions. And that like has all these incredible repercussions that we think will come from that.
And
But
ABI is what is
is our
your
nonprofit.
group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's our
This reminds me
nonprofit.
of Popper a bit. I know you like Popper and this active Darwinism. How does that
Exactly.
relate?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So there were two people basically in the 1980s who, really they really tried to alert the world to this way of thinking about life and about Darwinism. The first one was Barbara McClintock, who was a Nobel laureate, and she did her work in the 1950s on maize, so like corn plants. And she found that when they were stressed, they could reorganize their chromosomes.
They
And
could jump, right? Aren't those the jumping?
jumping genes, yeah,
Yeah, so
transposition.
cool.
So yeah,
And
so
of course, everyone thought she was crazy and didn't listen to her because she's
they
a
didn't.
woman and she's talking about jumping genes. But anyway,
Exactly right, because that's not supposed to happen, but it was happening, and it did happen.
she
And
eventually got a Nobel Prize and it was all confirmed just for everyone
exactly.
listening. But
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech, she said,
which came really late, right? She was like in
it
her
was
80s or
30,
something.
yeah, it was 30 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 30 years after the work was published. So it was in like 1984, I think, or there about maybe 1983. But she said, the genome is a sensitive organ of the cell. That's what she said.
Beautiful. Wow.
And that's so cool.
Hmm.
And so along about the same time, Karl Popper, he
Let's just
was
stop. That's a sensitive organ of the cell because we think of it as a program, and it's like the DNA is some kind of computer program that just, it's just getting read off. And she's saying it's a sensitive organism. It's actually interacting with everything around it in a living sort of way, the cell. So I just needed to pause, but sorry, Popper.
yeah, exactly. That the cell is feeling and sensing the world, and part of that is how it's using its genome,
So
right?
it's reacting and changing its own behavior based on wherever is around it, which is not
Yeah.
the, following a code kind of idea that we've been
No,
thinking about. But anyway, and then Popper was the other one.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, genes are supposed to be difference makers, but now that we can read genomes, we see that they're not difference. In the way that we thought. I mean, and it's in principle not that much of a difference maker because every cell in your body, from hair to blood to muscles to teeth, it all has the same DNA, right? So
Right. I
something
mean,
else is making the difference
it's
along
obviously
the way.
very, very important and it's super cool. And there is some kind of like amazing continuity that's happening through this. But the living and the action and the actual cell and all this other stuff, I think I heard you say once that like
Yeah.
if you put the DNA, if you thought of the DNA as like squished up as a football, then the rest of the cell would be the whole Central Park or something. And we've been just thinking everything is this little DNA, which is super cool. It's
Yeah.
doing some amazing stuff. But what about the whole Central Park too? The living and the acting and all that, that hasn't really been noticed, right? And that's what McClintock was noticing and Popper and of course you and your group. But
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, so Popper said, it's impossible to explain. He was speaking out against his memoir lecture is where this really happened. He was speaking out against the sort of selfish gene view, which had been articulated in the 70s by this guy Jacques Monod and also by Richard Dawkins, with the selfish gene, his book. And so that idea had really like taken hold, and I think it still holds sway. Um, and that's just the idea that like sure there's flexibility as DNA is interpreted, but the DNA causes itself to be interpreted in a certain way. And so Monod, he discovered this thing called the lac operon, which is basically a place in the DNA of E. coli, which in the presence of one type of sugar, it gets encoded one way, and in presence of another type of sugar, it gets encoded a different way. And so it's an on-off switch like built into the genome. That's called an operon. And so, that type of thinking, he extrapolated from that to say like basically the whole organism is an operon. Like everything we do is just the genes switching themselves on and off to result in function that reproduces the genes, right? We are just a program, that the genes are orchestrating to get the genes into the future. And so, right, it's backwards, right? It's totally counterintuitive, but it was persuasive enough because it avoided this whole question of teleology and like where does our purpose come from in a way that scientists felt like they could avoid asking that question. And so if they just treated everything as an operon. So Popper was wise enough to be aware of this trick, and he was like, "This is not all there is. Let me speak about it." So in this memoir lecture, and he was kind of buddies with a lot of theoretical biologists, and he did a lot of work on these questions. And so he said, "Look, I want to argue against this idea that um, there's just blind mutation and then the action of the environment, and that's all we need to explain here." He's like, organisms, it's impossible to explain life without explaining the intentional creativity of organisms. Like they get themselves into situations that affect the conditions of their own natural selection, right? And so you have to explain that energy and that intention. He didn't say where it came from, but he had these other um, he had a deep epistemology of where knowledge of how knowledge can arise.
did
And
he actually call it active Darwinism? And you said it was in the
yeah,
late 80s, so he must have been about to pass away, or that was
yeah.
at the end of his life. Okay.
It was 2 years before he died. He gave this memoir lecture, and it was written down, but then the transcript was put in a box at the Hoover Institution, and the box was marked to be opened in 2029. No, I don't know why.
Why?
I don't know why,
How
but
weird.
yeah, but this scholar named Nyman, Hans Joachim Nyman, found it, and he opened the box and he published it because he was like this. He published it under Two Secrets of it's because the name of his book is Two Secrets of Life, and it was Popper's thoughts about Darwinism, that are totally in tune with what we know now about as you said epigenetics, about Lamarckism and the way that organisms are clearly upstream of their DNA sequences in some way. And we don't have a scientific theory of how that can be, of how
Can
that.
we find that book? I mean, can we read that lecture by Popper now?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it?
you can buy it. Yeah,
Wow.
it's a great book. Yeah, it's called
Amazing story.
I think it's called Karl Popper and the Two Secrets of Life or something like that.
Okay, cool. So you
Yeah,
said there's
incredible.
so McClintock and Popper and who are the heroes and who are the villains again? Although I try not to put things in dichotomous
I
terms,
know.
so nobody's really
I
any of
know.
this, but in this
Well, all these,
particular,
yeah, all these. So Lamarck and Darwin, and and yeah, and McClintock and Popper were all trying to tell us,
Okay.
there's a way to have natural selection and also have agency, right? It's not one or the other. It's not natural selection versus God. Like you don't have to leap all the way to God does everything. God directs everyone what to do. You can
Yeah.
also you could have a biological mechanism for agency, and that's actually a testable possibility.
So is this also related to like gene transfer and stuff? Do you know that book, The Tangled Tree?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a really good
totally.
book. And I feel
It
like
is.
that's another side of all this, related to, I guess what we're talking about basically is that organisms can influence, I mean, how the variation of their offspring in the way we were talking about, outside of these usual coding kind of things, what that really is, what's happening there.
Yeah, well, you have to think of an organism, you have to think about it from the selfish gene perspective first, and think about, what's supposed to be happening is that there's this inherited program, okay, and if the program has instructions in it, they're supposed to be faithful to themselves, right? You can't have a program that says scramble me. You get it? Like if you have that program, you can only run it one time and then it's scrambled and it doesn't work again, right? So so that's the problem. That's the circular argument is trying to say that there's an inherited program that says change the inherited program. Okay, so they had like a number of intellectual scaffoldings that were built to try and protect that idea. And one of them is there's no Lamarckism. It's only blind variation. But that really never made that much sense. The other one is the Weissman barrier, which is like, oh well, the DNA or the germline is kind of locked away and it doesn't get influenced by variation. And so both of those scaffoldings have been destroyed because now what you just mentioned, horizontal gene transfer, like if all the knowledge of how to be an organism is supposed to be vertically inherited, then it doesn't make sense, for most of the genetic change to come from borrowing from other lineages because there's no like the program shouldn't say break me and borrow from another program. The program should be here's how it's done, and there are only random changes that get naturally selected. Instead, the program is saying, with prokaryotes, we found that horizontal gene transfer is an enormous, source of new genes. And so what they're doing is they're borrowing horizontally from other lineages. It'd be like if you went to a,
And horizontally is not coming from this like typical, you give it to your children kind of way. You're
it's
getting it.
not coming
Yeah.
from your child, from your parents.
Right.
Exactly. It's coming
Or you get it
from,
from your parents. Yeah.
it's coming from like someone who's not even related to you, Like,
Right.
yeah. And so yeah, and then there's, transposition, which we talked about with Barbara McClintock
Yeah. And also
and
the whole what's the word?
symbiogenesis. Yeah,
Yeah, all of that
exactly.
too has calls all this into question, and where the beginning and the end of something really starts. But we can't go into all that. But I'm very interested in that too. But I guess the
Yeah,
point is like this
totally.
genus programmer thing is coming into a lot of trouble now, right? From all kinds of ways. Like it's not really
Right.
making sense anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So Dennis Noble debated Richard Dawkins on stage recently and just totally demolished him. But it
Oh,
was,
really?
yeah, because
Dennis Noble also brought like Lynn Margulis and a lot of people to debate those guys way back too. I mean, he was onto this a long time ago.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
amazing. And in
Yeah.
that Music of Life book of his is just beautiful too, which kind of goes
Yeah.
towards also some stuff Richard Watson is doing, which is great, which we've talked about here. But so there's
Yeah,
a lot of other
exactly.
ways to think about this, but most people still think about it at Gina's programmer.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and yeah, I mean there are three hypotheses within agency, I mean, so far, and there could be many more. Like, but so far, we have three testable ideas. The one is, what I would call evolution first agency, which is that, agency isn't necessarily universal to the whole tree of life. It just evolved but it's still very important. I think that one's refuted, but it's testable. It's worth testing. So the next one, the one that I call ABI is like invented because we want to make as many of these ideas testable as possible. We want to parse them into like actual physical experiments that can decide one way or another. Here's which way to turn in looking for this mechanism.
Are you really trying to decide one way or the other? Or are you also trying to open up the space beyond this kind of very rigid way of thinking about it? I mean, are you exploring to gather many ideas, or are you trying to like reverse this kind of idea, would you say?
Well, I mean, it the whole part of the problem is that you know I think a deep part of rationality, which is overlooked, is this idea that you know ideas can be proven wrong, but they can't be proven right. And
So we're
so,
back at Popper again,
yeah, we're
right?
back at
Yeah.
Popper. I mean, this is really core to the way we're trying to approach things at ABI, and which is in an open-minded way, right? But a rigorous way, in a rational, logical way. Like we're not just like, well, there are many possibilities, so we'll just write papers and not try to decide between them. There are many possibilities, but Popper was really writing about the difference between math and science, right? So in math, you can have a proof, and if you demonstrate it, all of math is one big tautology. It doesn't connect to the world. I mean, people might dispute me on that, but anyway, it doesn't necessarily connect to the world. And if you prove something is true in mathematics, you've proven it. It's correct, right? That's why they call them proofs. Okay, but when you have a theory that attaches to the world, no matter what the theory says, it always has predictions that you can't verify because you can't look at the whole world. You can't look at the
And the
whole
world's always changing, even by the math you're doing to try to understand it. So it's all very,
exactly.
yeah.
You'd have to look at the whole past and the whole future of the whole universe, right? In order to verify that your scientific theory is correct. Okay, so there's no proof like that. All you can look at is just particular instances. Well, what those instances can do is they can prove your theory wrong. If you're rigorous about what your theory says about the world, then you can look at the world and see if you find an example where the world does something different, where nature disagrees with you, then you can throw away that theory. And what Popper was saying is that looking at the world doesn't give you the new theory. Like the new theory comes from creativity. The new theory comes from your wild imagination. You're trying to integrate, the facts that you know about into some idea that's testable, right? But that doesn't mean that the things you didn't think about are not salient. They are salient. Like the truth, like what he's saying is that we test, and that allows us to eliminate certain ideas, but it doesn't get us to the final truth, and that can we can't go any further. Like we can always get better because so much of the universe we can't observe, so we have to keep guessing until we get better and better. And so
Yeah, I
I
like
see
this a
this
lot
whole
because this is like Popper was sort of resisting Hume and induction, right? And you're talking about falsification and theory laden kind of stuff. And
yeah
but your way of turning it is very interesting because you say it means we need to be more creative and wild, like you just said. So that's really interesting too. Could you just for people
yeah
who, yeah, could you? That's not a normal kind of way of seeing this. So I'd like you to.
No, because so many people take it the wrong way. So many people and fans of Popper take it the wrong way and become really, really rigid, and hard to talk to because they're like, and the attitude I would criticize there is the attitude is what I see is all there is, and that will last forever. So like when Jacques Monod looks at the E. coli and he sees an operon, he's like, what I see is all there is, and that will last forever. And Richard Dawkins likewise. He's like, this is the only possible explanation for life. There could be everything else is theology. It's either this or God. But that's not logically defensible. That's not rational, actually. Like, actually, rationality is about imagining all the consequences of your idea and then going and looking and see if the world agrees with it, right? It tells you you have to have an idea first before you can look at the world and find out, if it agrees. And it's always going to disagree. That's why there's no end to science. And so to me, that gives us this like tremendous humility, and like and it makes us want to welcome. It makes me really want to welcome crazy ideas, because maybe they're not entirely even testable, right? But often, and Popper said this, like often metaphysical ideas become testable much later, when something changes, and so it's not worth like dismissing ideas that sound crazy before, because maybe they could be worked into something cool, later on, and they might turn out to be closer to the truth.
That's
Then
what I was trying to get at by it's not that you're just saying everything is wrong or try to find the right way, but you're opening this way in which we understand that everything we do changes everything that can be done. And so yes, like it's very important to do the experiments and all of the falsification is important, but the wildness you've put back in and the entropy and the idea that we might not ever solve this even though we're going to make progress, which is kind of a holding of paradox in a way, which is not normal in this world, I think.
yeah, well, if we wait, the point is, if we wait for the evidence, we'll never solve it, right? We have to have a guess before we know where to go look for evidence,
Yeah.
So,
At some point, you
so
even say body is a guess or life is a guess or something. You
right,
still, yeah.
right, exactly, yeah. So, yeah, because I see this whole problem in those terms, but that's one hypothesis, about agency.
Is that where you came up with this new term that you use? Epissolution? Is that the right way to say it?
Epissolution. So
Epis.
epissolution is like a family of possible solutions to agency.
Okay.
So it's not the only one. And within epissolution, there are a couple of, well, there are at least two testable ideas within that. But epissolution is just the idea that there's a universal mechanism for learning in all cells. Okay. And that it's prior to evolution. Like it's a foundational core principle of life.
So is that,
So
so you're saying mind is there from the beginning? Is that too
right.
general?
Right. No, that's accurate. Yeah, that's accurate. And it not doesn't mean necessarily conscious mind, right? It doesn't mean,
No.
because
It
we're
means
unconscious.
intelligence, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily the same as the problem of consciousness, but it is intentional directionality. And I think it implies a certain curiosity. I think it entails curiosity about the world and being willing to um, be epistemically active, like trying to get better knowledge from the world.
Is
And
that what
so,
you mean when you say that it requires a self or something like that? Because to go back to that natural
yeah,
selection stuff we were talking about. Yeah, how
right.
does that play out? This because you say it requires a self and there's creativity and yeah, how is this all kind of
Yeah,
coming together here?
totally. Yeah, natural selection presupposes a self and reproduction, inheritance, and variation. It presupposes all those things. But you don't just get a self. I mean, you don't just find a self, right? I mean, a self is a certain thing that has to be maintained. And if it's not maintained by a genetic program, it has to be maintained by some other physical process. So in order for us to have a scientific explanation, it has to be maintained by some other physical process, right? And so their families, they're families of solution for agency that involve multiple mechanisms. That's like Terence Deacon has a theory of constraint closure, for example. And in those theories, essentially, you know, life does have a directionality, but it's basically put there by natural selection, you know. And so epistolution is the other option, which is that there's a universal mechanism for learning in all cells. And that would take it, then the directionality is put there by the organism, right? It's there from the beginning. And it's about something like learning about the world. Like that's the purpose of life. learning about the world, not necessarily surviving and reproducing. And of course, you don't become a lineage unless you do survive and reproduce, but that's not necessarily the thing that you are trying to do. So,
Yeah, so then we have what's like holding it all together. I mean, in a way, you could think of this as going back to the argument you said isn't true regarding, needing God or something like that, because how is it that, from the beginning we have to have something holding all this together, you know? I mean, a
yeah,
self doesn't just come by itself from
right.
evolution. You're saying that, I think, but can you walk me through that argument just a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there has to be something that accumulates knowledge. Like, you know, we're talking about like it's a spontaneous process, of course, but there's the actual hypothesis, one of them is that within epistolution, I told you there are two possibilities. So one is this like Bayesian inference, kind of inductivism, right? So it's kind of like, an organism is a network. The network is deformed by its contact with the environment, and the deformations through kind of use and disuse, they follow a certain algorithm, and that allows the system to be able to generalize, that it gives it learning. And so Richard invented that. That's called natural induction. And it's a possibility that that could be a really, really deep network that learns something really deep about the world in like a multi-dimensional way, and that explains the directionality of life. The other possibility that's more Popperian, that I think is it's just my personal preference, right? But these are testable. I mean, as
And you're all
president of
working together
ABI.
to test these,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
You're
ABI,
working with a lot of biologists and people that are
yeah. So
there.
yeah, let me just list some of them. So Dennis Noble, he's part of it. He's a fellow of the Royal Society. He's debated Richard Dawkins on stage. We've got Michael Levin, who you've interviewed on your show. He's one of the most famous biologists in the world. He's published in Science and Nature. He's been featured in the New York Times several times. We've got Richard Watson, who you've also interviewed, who's the inventor of natural induction. We've got Josh Bongard, who built the first living robots.
Oh,
We've
wow. I
got
didn't know Josh Bungard was with you all too. Wow.
yeah,
Has he
yeah.
talked yet? I don't think I've heard that one, right? I haven't seen that one, but
No, he hasn't been a guest at Agential
okay.
Topics yet, but
Anyway, but yeah,
this is
wow.
it. But this is
So
the
it's
research
it's
thing.
quite a
Yeah.
lot of, important thinkers.
Important thinkers. Yeah, we've got several more. Oded Rachavi. We've got Eloy Camprusi, Joanna Javier, Stu Kaufman's on our board. He's one of the inventors of complexity theory. So these are serious people, and they're we're trying to make these questions testable as best we can, but with that Popperian open-mindedness, right? That there may be another way of formulating things that's even better, and we don't necessarily, but we're looking for mechanism. So the deep natural induction, that's one hypothesis. The sort of constraint closure, that's another hypothesis. The third one is my favorite, but it's just, because it's very closely based on Popper, which is the idea that harmonic resonance maintains the self. And the reason why there's a boundary to it, because harmonic resonance sort of passes through things, right? But it integrates information in an analog way, unlike any other physical natural process. And the reason why I think that can explain the origin of the self is because of sleep. So when we sleep, and that's really how I came, like, back to my personal history. That's kind of how I came to this problem in the first place, was I was thinking about sleep and like, what are we? Why are we sleeping? Why do we spend 8 hours? That's totally unfit from a reproductive point of view.
Hmm.
Why can't we
Hmm.
just be active pursuing mates and food until we starve to death? Just keep going. We can't do that, right? And all complex, cognitively complex beings, we all, even cephalopods, squids and octopus, they sleep as well. And our common ancestor with them was back in the Cambrian. So, in fact, they do REM sleep. So that hypothesis is that harmonic resonance has two modes, and one of them is a sleep mode where you're cut off from sensory perception in order that the internal harmonic resonance within your body can become phase locked. There can be constructive and destructive interference in the oscillations so that they become a congruent whole. And then once they're a congruent whole and all that constructive and destructive interference is over with, you wake back up, right? And you enter the world as this congruent being. But then your interaction with the world through perception changes your harmonics again and sort of degrades them, right? It introduces these disharmonies. And that's why you can't just stay awake forever, because these disharmonies would overwhelm your congruent system and you would
That's really
disintegrate.
interesting. That kind of relates to certain ways the brain works too, where we need to kind of yeah, I won't go into all that as we don't have time, but it's also interesting because of the oscillation. That's such a theme all throughout the body. And also we talked, Dennis Noble's working with you, and he's talked about music, and Richard also has talked about music. And in a really general way, do you really see it as sort of, are we oscillating with the environment and with ourselves at all these different scales, or am I going too far to really think of it like that?
No, that's not going too far. I mean, like I said, it's a testable hypothesis, and there's at least two other ways that it could be, but that's my favorite way because I think that
Yeah.
really encapsulates the most. Um, it would explain it would explain the largest number of mysteries, I
I
think.
was trying to think, you said something about like sleep is conjecture and waking is how did you say it? Refutation or something like that? Just
Yeah,
to like go back
yeah,
to the philosophy. What in the world does that mean exactly?
right,
Relative to the...
exactly. Yeah, well, the idea of a conjecture is a guess, right? It has
So
consequences.
you're saying our waking state is a kind of guessing, and then no, what are
We've
you
like
saying?
formed, yeah, we've formed a guess. We formed a guess about the world, about what's possible and impossible in the world while we're sleeping. And then when we wake
With
up
our bodies, literally. Like our
with,
bodies are literally sort of the material, the oscillating possibility of when we wake up, and then we sort of
like we are the
refute or
guess.
whatever,
Like it sounds,
falsify the day, or
yeah,
yeah.
like it sounds like a category error, but it's not. Like we literally are a physical guess about the world.
That's a
Like
really interesting way to think about it.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
it also
right.
relates, I know you work with like active inference ideas too, and prediction and all that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, the problem I think it solves is that attention is scarce. Attention is not, we don't, we're not like one of those cameras on the Google truck. You know what I mean? Like we don't take in, we don't take in very much, like my favorite example is like when I drive down to town, it's a 20-minute drive. And I think I pass probably, I don't know, between you know, 5 and 10 million trees of different sizes, from little bitty trees, big trees, all
So
those
many.
trees
Well,
on the way. Yeah, I live in a forested region,
yeah.
but I don't really notice any of them, right? I mean, on a normal day, like I just drive where I'm going, I'm thinking about something, I'm listening to music, whatever, But if I saw a tree that was made out of glass or was turned upside down with its roots in the air and leaves down on the ground, or I saw a tree that was painted purple, I would remember it probably for the rest of my life, like because it would be so, it was something that I thought was impossible. Those are the things that become parts of our body, like those refutations, right? So we have this kind of general concept of what's possible out there. It's not a prediction. Like I'm not predicting particular, that I'll see this and not see that. If I turned the corner and there was a school bus coming instead of a fire truck, it wouldn't like be a big deal, right? Because I have this sense of possibility. And I think that's what organisms really are, is like a sense of what's possible and impossible. It's not a specific prediction of data that came from all the data that you took in. It just came from certain moments, right? In
Mhm.
your whole life, like there's certain moments that stick with you and become these memories that are really foundational. And that's because I think they changed your whole sense of causation in the world. You change your sense of what's possible out there. And, sometimes they're surprising moments. Like you didn't realize that, you know, I didn't realize that moment where I stepped on someone's knee, when I was 17 and it really hurt them. Like I didn't know I was going to remember that forever, like, and still feel a cringe of pain and guilt, from myself. Like when I think about that moment, it's like, why was that the moment, that I learned like people are sensitive, people are vulnerable, even people that don't seem like it, you can really hurt someone. I don't know. They're just, it wasn't like I predicted one thing and my prediction was way off. It was just like it was a moment where a whole new possibility opened up, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of those stories you told at the beginning too. And also, I think we've talked about philosophy before, and you've talked about it's about avoiding mistakes, or I mean, it kind of goes with the theme of Popper that I know is so important for you. But and I have that too. It's weird, the things where you're just kind of doing what you're not really noticing in the way you said, and something comes along and it shocks you and you never forget it, and it changes your trajectory in the way we've been talking about, right? So just to think about, you said you started this whole exploration into agency and biology because you were having a really hard time, which I guess, relates to this, and you're going through a lot, and you seem healthy now. I hope everything's okay with that. I would like to know, but and also just how do you see that in this context of how that really sounds like a very, very difficult moment with all that stuff has led you to now you're, in a corporation, you're testing ideas about really big ideas with some of the most important scientists in the world. So how can I relate these things, or how does that feel for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, it feels like I feel incredibly lucky, right? Blessed. I mean, this is really like, you know, it's an amazing opportunity, and these questions are so important. And um, I feel really lucky that I found them, that I found something to work on that really matters. And I don't have the problem that some people have in midlife where they feel like, you know, everything I did has no meaning, everything in my life has like an extreme amount of meaning. And I'm very, very lucky for that. But um, yeah, I mean, part of it is also like the sense that, you know, problems can't usually wait until you're ready to solve them, Like when I sort of discovered all this, I was like, people kept telling me like, "Oh, you should go, hey, Charlie, you should go get a PhD, you should really, you know, you should really, you should really become a professor, And I was just like, you know, I'm like, there's a problem to be worked on here, I think you become qualified to work on problems by working on them, like, and so, um, yeah, I mean, I started gathering people together with agential topics and inviting, luminaries like yourself, to to
Yes,
speak
I was
and to
very
give.
lucky to
But
fit with the others.
of course you did. But it's just the willingness, it's it's having, I was I was blessed with a sense that and I think I got it in part from Deep Springs College, the sense that if you try, you know, there's no problem you can't work on, you just have to start working, right? And so so yeah, that's
I love that, Charlie, and it reminds me of the intentional creativity. You said that term a couple times, or it's come up, and I feel like right now we're at this very weird moment where everything's changing about what school is even, and what degrees mean, and how we can educate ourselves. We can go on YouTube and, basically go to Harvard now. And so it's kind of beautiful that you decided to just do it. And it's almost an example pointing towards other ways that we're going to be able to do these kinds of things. And it's not like you just did it by yourself. You tried to find people who have knowledge in all these different ways. You're talking to philosophers, you're talking to biologists, you're talking to everyone. Um, and I just, yeah, what would you like to leave people with that, about that idea, or how you see that, or the importance of that, or and that word intentional creativity, is that even right for me to bring that up here at all? Or
Yeah, no, it's totally right. I mean, I think that the main thing is that, a lot of times people that want to be taken seriously, they try to do that by adopting this, attitude that I really disliked, which is what I see is all there is, and that's all there ever will be, and they try really hard to convince you that there's nothing more out there. And that's an irrational. It's not that that's annoying and, judgmental and dogmatic. It is all those things, but it's also irrational. It's irrational to be closed-minded. I mean, there are like we cannot look at the whole universe. And so we have to be humble about what we can look at, try our best to look at the things that really matter, and then take them seriously. I mean, part of what's been happening in biology is people have been believing and disbelieving the same theory at the same time. Instead of taking the theory seriously and saying, here's what it says, let's look at nature and be sure that that's what's happening. And if that's not what's happening, let's be serious about that. Like, let's take our own results seriously and try and invent some new possibility, because it's wide open now. And so that's, yeah.
I like that, the sort of wildness um, coming back in. And I just have to say, one thing I really appreciate about you is that you really care about all of this, and you can feel it. And it feels, I mean, I hope you always stay in that place where you're trying to understand the world, and you're coming from this place of care, and there's a kind of humbleness, even as you do so much. And I really, really appreciate that. And I just, since it is love and philosophy, I want to ask you about that. Does that make you feel weird when I say that? I mean, is it coming from a place of care or love even? Or, yeah, how do you see those words related to all this that you're doing now and all that you've been through too, your whole wild life?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, so much. Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah, it was forged in a crucible of intense suffering, I had an intense period of suffering, and that caused me to be really open-minded and to be a lot more patient with other people. I was very impatient as a younger. I'm still a little bit impatient, but being a dad is part of that. You just, you just realize, you know,
You
yeah,
have to learn it.
you have
Yeah,
to
it's
learn.
interesting you
Yeah.
started with your kids. I mean, I'm not sure how to connect that, but that love and that care seems to be, that's the way you wanted to open this conversation, which is about all the stuff we've been talking about relative to even rethinking reproduction and as the kind of force. But I feel like you're trying to expand that, right? There's something expansive going on here, even as you're trying to get more particular and more falsifiable kind of experimentation. How does that sit with you? Just
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally right. And Richard, he's the co-founder, and Joanna, and there's other really good people, Josh Wolk and Dina Rudick and Lizzie Devane, but we all have in common, I think, a sense that this is a bigger thing, that if we just do some scientific experiments and don't interpret them for the world, help the world, invite the world in, like it really has to be inviting everyone in, to look at this and experience this and help us learn what it means, that's really important. Yeah, that's that's everything, because we're not in a yeah we're everyone sort of knows we're in a situation now that we don't understand, right? Societally, politically, everything. We're in new waters. Things change quickly. We don't afford to be like too rigid. We have to be we have to we have to open up to other people and listen.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that you opened instead of closed, because a lot of us go through these hard times, and it's hard to remain open and to open our heart. So it's really interesting that your heart opened through all this suffering, and I
Yeah.
think you can see that of course none of us are perfect, and there's life is still hard, but you can see what the opening brings in, right? Things you never could have imagined back then. I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful kind of thing to just be aware of. And even that, thinking about your kids and all our kids, all the generations to come, reproduction can be something else too. I mean, your ideas and all of this stuff that we're talking about also sets paths forward for what's possible. So I just want to bring that up at the end. I don't know if there's anything you want to say, or anything, any experiences of love or anything else that are on your heart that you want to share before we go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I'll share I will share something with you. I'll share something very special that happened to my daughter recently because of love. So my daughter really, she loves otters. She's really into otters. And she's always had an otter stuffy. It's like her favorite stuffy. She has an otter and a possum. And
Oh, how
she
awesome.
they're friends. And they're possibly gay together. And she's very proud of them. Anyway, so she's always had a otter stuffy, and her mom so just recently took her to a zoo in Belgium where they have, check this out. Not only do they have an amazing otter exhibit, but they have a hotel room built into the otter exhibit where you can spend the night in a
No.
hotel room, and the glass window of your hotel room is the otter tank.
Whoa, she must have been so
Is that
thrilled.
blowing your
I would have
mind?
been over the moon at that age.
And so
Wow.
she put her otter stuffy up in the window, and the real otter came over and said hello to her otter
Oh, that's so
stuffy.
sweet. Oh, I love that. I love beavers, so I can imagine, and seals. So, oh, that's beautiful. Well, that's a very happy kind of way to end, and also bringing the other animals back in, the other creatures in the world. And also, of course, your beautiful children, your daughter. Well, thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate all you're doing, and it's been wonderful to talk to you. And thanks for, inviting me into your world a little bit.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Andrea.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.